Welcome to the SpartanMag.com VCast. Jim Comparoni, Paul Konyndyk. We're at the press center at Spartan Stadium. Usually we're outside, but we were the last ones in here. We decided to be in here. We're changing it up a little bit. Michigan State looking for a change up this weekend, going to Rutgers. Michigan State 2-3, as everybody knows. Very difficult, interesting season. Interesting might not be the right word. Difficult season for Michigan State fans to follow. An even more difficult season for Michigan State players, Paul. And I continue to be impressed with the players. Came in here and interviewed today Jordan Hall, Darius Snow, Chance Rucker, Kevin Wigginton, the right guard. Harlan Barnett said that when they got out in practice for the first day this week on Monday, he said he can tell they're locked in, they want to play, they practiced hard. He was impressed with that. I don't think that's just coach speak. I think that's really a reflection of who they are and what they're doing. I'm impressed, first of all, with the young men coming in here, answering questions about everything they've been through this year. And I do believe that they are still bought in, and they're going to give max effort, which is required in this sport. Your thoughts on the players today and what you're expecting for them coming off the bye week?
I think the bye week came at a good time. You know, I think they're playing pretty well in a lot of ways, you know, in losses to Maryland and Iowa. And you look at the three teams they've lost to. Everyone talks about they lost 3 games in a row. Those 3 teams have a combined record of 15-2. You know, whether what you think of those teams, notwithstanding, Iowa doesn't have a great offense. I get it, but they've got a great defense, and Michigan State did some good things against those guys, including running the football. So there's stuff that Michigan State can build on both sides of the ball, and the key is going to be have they cleaned enough stuff up during the bye week? Do they have good enough attention to detail to put that effort onto the field and put a product out on the field that can win games? I'm not surprised that these guys continue to battle and continue to fight. I think it's part of the process. It's part of who they are. You see a lot of teams. I'll go back to even watching Nebraska last year. They were in a lot of games, you know, and teams that have had a hard time. They're in a lot of games. The big question is, can you get to that point where you're not just in games? Can you win games that are winnable? Mm-hmm. And to me, that's going to be a tough test this weekend against a Rutgers team that is not as bad as you think. They're a team that's 4-0 at home, 4-2 overall. I think they've got a quality defensive line. I think they've got a couple good defensive backs. You know, Michigan State's going to have to play a good game, and I think they're looking forward to testing themselves against Rutgers. They need a win. I think they see this as an opportunity, just like they saw the last 2 games as an opportunity to win. But can they do enough good things and correct some of the things that need to be corrected to get the job done?
If they play as well as they did against Maryland and Iowa without turning it over, they'll beat Rutgers. Yeah. I don't know if they can do that or not. I don't know who the quarterback's going to be. Right. If you take Michigan State with Noah Kim and you don't turn it over, they beat Rutgers. Now, if you take him out and put Houser in, I have no idea what that's going to look like. I know he's a talented guy and he's been practicing well and all those things, but at some point when he has his first college start, he will be at square one from a learning experience. Noah Kim, whatever you think about him, he's at square 6 and had a couple of one interception at Iowa on that wide side of the field was a difficult one. When I look back at the interception on the stutter and go to Jerron Glover, initially I thought that's a ball maybe he shouldn't have thrown because DeJean did not bite on the stutter. Maybe it's a play that you don't call. I don't know. But looking at it again, Glover kind of mistimed his route, mistimed his jump, not his route. Didn't carry on with his route. I'm sure that when Glover looks at the film as a freshman, he will see that he could have kept running and then jumped later, and if nothing else, gotten a hand of the ball to knock it away. He kind of mistimed it. I don't think that one's on the quarterback. So I'll apologize to Noah Kim about that one. Noah Kim did some good things in that game. You know, the field goal drive at the end of the first half, there was a square in to Montori Foster. That was a big-time throw stepping up. He's got arm talent. Everybody knows that. Looked real good first 2 games against bad defenses. He looked more comfortable in the pocket the last couple of games than he did against Washington. That's progress. You know, we can go back to look at the first few games when Jim Miller started or Kirk Cousins or Connor Cook, and it was miserable at times. Maybe not always miserable with Cousins, but he made mistakes. So that's what the coaching staff is tasked with. Do you interrupt that progress that Kim is making? But we don't know in practice how much progress Houser's making. Difficult situation for a team that badly needs to win. But the Michigan State against Maryland, the Michigan State against Iowa, with fewer mistakes from Noah Kim, wins this game. So, in my opinion, against Rutgers. So do you make that change right now? That's what everybody's talking about. Coming out of the Maryland game, Barnett said, we're going to stick with Kim. Coming out of the Iowa game, he says, we're going to reevaluate. What do you make of that? What's your gut feel on who the quarterback's going to be and how that's going to shake out?
Well, I said at Iowa, and some people didn't like what I said at Iowa, that they were smart to go with Noah Kim at Iowa. I just don't think you put a freshman or an inexperienced quarterback in that type of situation. You're not going to have a chance to win.
To start or mid-game?
Either way.
Mm-hmm.
Against Iowa. But if you're gonna make a quarterback change, it's gonna be out of the bye week. And based on what Harlan Barnett said yesterday when he was asked, and he didn't come out and say Noah Kim's our guy. He said they know what they're gonna do moving forward, and the players know what's gonna happen. I took that to mean that there's likely gonna be a quarterback change. Now,
I think you're right, because if it's Kim, you come out and say Kim's still my guy, right?
I don't know if you do. If you say that, but the way he said it. And the way the body language was, I read that it's going to be a change. Now,
right.
part of that has to do with the bye week, and I think that has something to do with it. Now, I will say this: if Nathan Carter in the run game operation performs as well against Rutgers as it did at Iowa, then Michigan State's going to have a chance to win this game with whomever is at quarterback, whether it's Katin Houser or Noah Kim. Now, the question I have is, so what happens if that run game isn't getting 4 or 5 yards a clip? What happens if there's some of these like formation type penalties? And I expect when you have a first year quarterback, when you have a guy that hasn't played, that's where I expect some of the formation penalties and illegal motions and some of the kind of not clean type stuff with the offensive line play that could be a problem. But I think this Katin Houser is gonna play. I don't think either Noah Kim or Katin Houser or anybody that Michigan State has had in a while has the ability as a quarterback to carry a team when they can't run the football. Peyton Thorne at times with elite receivers. Michigan State doesn't have elite receivers this year. They don't have Keon Coleman. They don't have Jaden Reed. Those guys were very, very talented receivers, and they don't have Speedy Naylor. They've got some good young receivers who are still making some mistakes. Those guys are doing some good things as well. They're blocking well in the run game, and they're doing some nice things. But this is going to be a game where whomever is at quarterback has to have a good running game. If they don't, then that's when things kind of spiral.
And Rutgers pretty good on defense, but they're not Iowa. Katin Houser, if he on the road, it's a lot easier than playing at Iowa.
Right.
So if he comes out and throws for 275, don't equate that to what Kim did at Iowa and think that that's apples to apples.
I will say this, though. Like when Rutgers played Michigan, for a half they made it hard. And that's the thing with Rutgers. They don't have the depth to be a really good defense. But Greg Schiano's got a defensive background. He's got a solid scheme. They've got some solid interior defensive linemen, and you've got to block well. You can't sleepwalk against these guys. So the big thing in my mind for Michigan State is they might have some issues running the football early, getting that run established. But you can't be in a situation where you're down 2 scores because you gave up points on defense or whatnot. I think Michigan State, if they stick with it, if they keep grinding through this thing, if there aren't critical errors being made, they're gonna have a chance to win. But it's interceptions, fumbles, those type of things that could potentially kill you in this game. And we've seen too many of those type of mistakes from Michigan State.
And maybe there'll be fewer mistakes with Houser. I mean, everybody knows Kim's touchdown to interception ratio. It's not good. Everybody knows Michigan State is not producing touchdowns.
What is Houser's touchdown to interception ratio?
Is it 0 to 2 maybe? 0 to 1?
1 to 2?
Something like that.
I'm just saying, like.
But he hasn't played, so he's better, Paul.
I understand that, but it's kind of, I don't know.
I mean, Kim's is really not good.
Yeah, and it's not. And you're playing. You played an Iowa team, and you didn't. And you played a Maryland team that you'd have better stats if there weren't drop passes or if a tight end could catch a football. I get it, and I can understand why Michigan State would make a quarterback change. All I'm saying is, for the offense to be functional or better than functional, they have to have a quality run game, because neither of these two quarterbacks, regardless of whoever's throwing the football, is good enough, in my opinion, at this point in their development, to play a one-dimensional football game, and that's the bottom line.
The run game looks like it's getting better. I mean, that was something in Iowa to put up 160 or whatever it was. They had they were
averaged about 5 yards a carry in that game.
Yeah,
which is really
against
good.
Iowa. That's really solid. So if that carries on.
So it's a good thing to go into a bye week, put a $160 in Iowa, 5 yards a carry, instead of going into a bye week saying, well, if we hadn't got this hold here or that play there. So you've got something you've got going. Can you build on that, and can you fine tune it, and can you bring it to the next level going into Rutgers? Now that's to me would signal significant progress. And if that does happen, if the run game operation is better at Rutgers than it was against Iowa, then Michigan State's moving in the right direction on offense.
I think that's possible, and you'd hope that would be the case. I know Kabilovic was really upset with what they did in the run game against Iowa, vowed that it would be better. Showed a little bit of progress against Maryland.
You mean
a lot
against
of
Washington?
progress. What'd I say? Washington?
Iowa.
And a lot better against Iowa last week. Progress there. Nate Carter's held it together pretty well. Jordan Simmons in the portal. Jalen Berger coming back a little bit against Iowa. Coming off the bye week, maybe he'll have a little bit more fuel. They'll need that. I'm not sure Carter can carry it, the 90% of the carries from here on out like he has been. But he's had a good season, over 100 yards 3 times. Number 2 in the Big Ten in yards per game is Nathan Carter. He needs some help from somebody.
Yeah.
We'll see if Berger can come back. Go ahead.
I think Berger gives whomever's at quarterback another, like, the safety valve. He's such a good pass catcher, and if you've got a defense that's really aggressive, he's a guy that you can trust in the screenplay to be in the right place and also have the hands to pull that ball in there. I feel like when I saw him warming up at Iowa, you could tell that maybe he was still kind of getting back, but he looked good enough to where you can think in this game he's going to be back in a decent position where Michigan State will be further ahead at tailback than they would have been otherwise, because I know Jordan Simmons entered the portal, but he wasn't going to do anything for you. I mean, he was pass protection at the most, and you can get pass protection from a Harold Joyner just as easily as you could from a Jordan Simmons.
As long as Carter stays healthy, they won't miss Simmons.
That's a big if too, and that's something we've been talking about going back to the offseason. We talked about, like, okay, Elijah Collins leaves for Oklahoma State. You have this guy not here anymore. Like, you bring a couple guys in, but is that good enough? And running backs, man, you can't have enough of them.
Michigan State's defense has been pretty good since the Washington game. Excellent against Maryland. I know they lost the game 31-9. Turnovers had everything to do with that. They outgained Maryland. They outgained Iowa. Stats are for losers. This is the stats are for losers department right here that I'm going into, but I mentioned it a number of times. Maryland's offense is good. They averaged 480 yards per game. Michigan State held them well below that average. They outgained Iowa on the ground, 150 to 60 or something like that? You don't do that without playing good football. I know Michigan State lost that game, but we've covered a lot of Michigan State teams that were good, that won championship rings and all those. A lot of times when I was writing pregame articles, maybe Michigan State was number 11 in the country, having a really good season, and they're playing like Northwestern or Purdue with a mediocre record. And I'd watch on film, and I'm like, Northwestern is good. Don't let that record fool you. Michigan State's going to need to play good football to win this game. That's 10 years ago. Well, now Michigan State is that team that's 2-3. And if I were covering Rutgers and watching Michigan State on film, I'd say, man, Michigan State lost to Maryland, but for 70% of the plays, they were the better team. They lost to Iowa, but for 70% of the team plays, they were the better team. That doesn't allow you to win games, but it can make you dangerous. If you look under the hood and look at actual football things that need to be corrected, it's a lot easier to correct turnovers and penalties than it is to correct bad defense, bad run game, bad pass game. And Michigan State, for all the problems they've had on defense the last 3 years, this year on defense, they've been pretty good, except for the Washington game. Of course, Iowa has a bad offense, but they did pretty well against Maryland. And I didn't realize it till Chris Solari brought it up. It's a real good stat that Michigan State's number 2 in the country in third down defense, 23%. First in the country is Utah, third in the country is Georgia. Michigan State second in the country in third down defense, which has been a huge Achilles heel, among other things, on defense in recent years. If you'd have told me that before the season, I'd have been like, man, Michigan State's in good position to make some damage this year. Now, that third down defense, some of that is with the blitzes. Michigan State is doing a good job blitzing and being on the same page with coverage behind it, which was not happening the first 3 years of the Mel Tucker era. They'd blitz and leave somebody open and have a mistake. Michigan State's bringing different looks on third down with some blitzes, and they're on the same page, and it looks like a real defense, despite the fact that there's 2 true freshmen out there.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting what Scotty Hazelton said today about communication, like in evaluating the Michigan State defense, or what the area that he thinks is better. He said communication across the board, but and he went into more depth or detail on that, and he said it's because, they were overly reliant last year on Xavier Henderson coming into the season with a young secondary. X obviously got hurt, so he's not out there, and they felt like, and we know this to be the case because it was something they hammered throughout spring ball and even training camp, is communication over communication. And
with Henderson, they relied on him to do all the communication.
Exactly. So you've got more players taking ownership in the communication piece, and the guys coming into games, even as second and third string backups that have been pressed into duty for whatever reason, when they take their reps in practice, like going all the way back to spring ball, they were forced to communicate, and they were graded hard on that. And it wasn't a deal where, okay, if you're a safety, or you're a third string safety, you're taking reps with the threes, that you can get away with not communicating. Everyone is forced to communicate, and I think it's showing up, and at least Hazelton thinks it's showing up on the field. And I think there's probably some truth to that. I would also say, when you look at what they're doing out there, the third down piece, the fact that the linebackers are veteran linebackers, and they've all been pretty consistent, and they played with the defensive line, and the defensive line's been pretty solid in terms of maybe not getting as much pass rush as they've wanted, but they haven't been freelancing. And so these guys are playing together as a unit. I think that's helped out a lot. And when you look at third down defense, a lot of it comes down to what happens on first and second down. Mm-hmm. Last year Michigan State would have been in third and long a lot as a defense, and they give up big plays or whatever. But I feel like this year Michigan State's been more consistent on those third and long plays, but they haven't been giving up huge run plays on first down. And it hasn't been a whole bunch of third and ones. There's been more 3rd and 5, 3 and 6, 3 and 7, 3rd and 9, those kind of plays. And to Michigan State's credit, they've done a better job getting off the field in those instances. That speaks to maybe some improved tackling in some instances, but it speaks to better communication. And to get off the field on third down, you gotta do your job on first down. And I think that's maybe where Michigan State's better. I give Michigan State's defensive backs some credit for doing a better job than last year's crew of rallying to the ball, that population of the ball. And if one guy misses a tackle, another guy's there to make it.
They've got areas they can improve. Tackling was spotty on the one touchdown, the little now route to Eric All. There were 3 or 4 missed tackles on that. There were missed tackles in the opening series of the game. Right. So they're not perfect.
That's where, and if you talk to Hazelton today, he said one of the things that they have to do is come on defense out of the gates. They've given entirely too much up on the first series of games. And that hasn't always led to teams scoring touchdowns, but it's a field position problem immediately. And Michigan State needs to be more. They can't give up penalties. They can't get penalty yards. They can't have missed tackles on the first series of the game. You can't give up, as Hazelton said, 15 play drives in the first quarter. That's not conducive to success.
And it remains to be seen whether Michigan State can keep up this improvement on defense when you have Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State on the schedule. They're going to be putting up big numbers, but the thought that Michigan State is terrible on defense, that's 2022. That's not the case right now. Maybe it'll turn out that way if they fall apart a little bit and teams put numbers on them. But as of right now, if you say Michigan State's a bad defense, you're living in the past, because they've not been that way the last couple of games.
You're basing it on what you saw against Washington and saying that there's been no improvement, and the teams that they played since then are terrible. And that's just not the case. Iowa does not have a good defense. I get that.
Offense.
I get that. But Maryland moved the ball easily on Ohio State.
And they still stopped the run against Iowa, which is no small task.
And the other thing is not just stopping the run against Iowa. I think stopping the run against Maryland was equally as impressive, because I think Maryland in some ways has a more explosive running attack than Iowa in terms of some of the things that they do. Roman Hemby's a heck of a tailback. He had some big runs against Ohio State. I thought Michigan State did a better job stopping Maryland's running game than Ohio State did last weekend. And this is in the portions of the game that I watched.
And the stats are for losers category. Michigan State right now in the Big Ten in yards per play allowed. That is the defensive stat. It's not total defense. It's yards per play allowed. Michigan State's number 5 in the Big Ten right now, and number 6 in the Big Ten in yards per play on offense. That's going to change when they play Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State. Now, they're not playing to pad stats, of course, but if you actually are middle of the pack defense and offense in the Big Ten, which is an improvement over last year, then you need to show that against Rutgers.
Right.
It needs to show up against Rutgers, taking care of the ball, go for 450 total offense, keep them under 275 total defense. I think they're capable of doing that. That being said, still don't know what it's going to look like with Houser. Might be good, no idea. Have no idea. So, but blocking, tackling, physicality, it's solid for Michigan State. And my question is whether they can continue to keep it together, because this is a grim sport when you start losing some games and the bumps and bruises start happening. We've covered a lot of teams here where it comes unraveled. Last year I thought it was coming unraveled before the Wisconsin game. Didn't happen. I thought it was completely unraveled before the Illinois game. Didn't happen. Different leadership at the helm at Michigan State right now with Harlan Barnett. But when he says that they're still locked in and ready to go out and win collisions, I think we're going to see that on Saturday. And Rutgers, it's 4-2. They've got a tough schedule. Their crossover games included Wisconsin and Iowa. They lost to Wisconsin already. They're probably going to lose to Iowa. They're going to go ahead and they've got Maryland later on. They're digging and clawing to try to get to 6 wins to get into a bowl game. They see this as an opportunity to get a win. They see Michigan State as a mark. That's a team that you're supposed to beat. And Michigan State's going to show up to try to prove otherwise. Meanwhile, Paul, you got the coaching situation going on. And that's what everybody's talking about. That's dominating the conversation. So we'd be remiss if we didn't bring it up. Michigan State with what's going on with the coaching search, it's officially underway. Everybody knows that. Michigan State is utilizing a search firm, not to give Michigan State candidates, but to help Michigan State with some of the candidates that Michigan State's already identified. So they're helping with some of those things. The search firm is not going to say, to my knowledge, they're not going to say, this is who you should hire, which is what a search firm did way back in 94 when they said you should hire Les Miles. Peter McPherson preferred Fran Ganter. He turned it down. They ended up with Nick Saban. Okay? That's when Les Miles was at Oklahoma State. Sometimes you utilize a search firm to give you candidates. It's kind of the other way, and it's my understanding, I'm still looking into it, the search firm is helping Michigan State, talking to agents, talking in the back channels, things that maybe they can do behind scenes more easily and quietly than out front. But that's underway. Everybody can look at the top 25 and look at head coaches that are probably available. Of course, Mike Elko at Duke, Oregon State, Jonathan Smith, Dickert at Washington State. Those are the 3 in the top 25 when you look at programs that might be looking to move up. I don't think Elko is going to be available necessarily. I think my sources tell me he's well paid at Duke, more so than people realize on the outside. Plus, he might not want to get involved with what some people perceive to be a circus at Michigan State, maybe rightfully so. I think Elko's a great candidate. Man, I watched them against Notre Dame, and physicality on offense and defense, on the same page on defense. Offense, they can run it hard against you, or they can spread it out and challenge you with some concepts. And impressed with him as an Ivy League guy on back, being on the staff when Clausen put it together at Wake Forest, and I think he was with him at Bowling Green and Fordham, and then coordinator at Notre Dame, coordinator at A&M. Elko's checking a lot of boxes. Impressive. I just don't think that – I think Michigan State's interested in him, and there's some indications he's interested in the agent world, but for Elko specifically, I'm just not sure that he's available to Michigan State. But the guy at Oregon State, the guy at Washington State, they're worth watching right now. And meanwhile, hey, I got to throw it out there. There have been reports out there from talk show people out west about Urban Meyer and all that. That's out there too. I wouldn't totally close the door on that situation, but that's like a different theater of Michigan State search, and that door is, I'll just say that is somewhat legitimate. But that's what's going on with the coaching situation. In the meantime, I think Washington State has a chance to put together some wins and improve that resume of Dickert.
Yeah, and I want to go back to the Elko thing because I get tired of people talking about the circus surrounding Michigan State. Everybody has got boards. Everyone's boards have medalers. Notre Dame is notorious for it. There's a lot of other schools, with it. But I think with coaching candidates, you have to look at who's using open job for leverage. And if you're Elko and you've got a big donor base and you've got some boosters, and Duke hasn't had much success in football, he's going to leverage that for a bigger contract at Duke. This Michigan State job is more attractive than a lot of people around the water cooler at work seem to think. I think that a lot of Michigan State people even have had a little bit of a woe is me attitude in terms of with the search, with the coaching search, just because based on what their friends from that root for Michigan think. And I think you've got to look at Michigan State as a have and not a have not in terms of resources, with it being in the Big Ten. And I think one of the things that Michigan State fans have been, I think, conditioned throughout the Mel Tucker era. There's, we talk about defeatism and like John L. Smith. I think there's a defeatism built into Mel Tucker's tenure in that we don't have the resources of a Georgia, and that's what you need to win football games. And I think a lot of Michigan State fans have bought into that. We don't have the money to pay for this. We don't have we can't do that. And I think you've got to look at your program and be proud of who you are. There's a lot of coaches that want to be at Michigan State, and there's a lot of coaches that would give up a lot to come here, in some instances uproot their families and move across the country. For Michigan State, it comes down, in my opinion, is you got to find the right guy for the job. And there's always a lot of different ways to skin a cat, but you got to be able to catch lightning in a bottle, and who knows if that next guy's going to be the next Mark D'Antonio. And but I think really they got to get back to whomever it is. It's got to, in my opinion, at this university, it has to be a culture of toughness and physicality, but player development and a family, and try to emulate in the football as best they can what Tom Izzo has going on in basketball. With the Tom Izzo model, you bring in those all-region type players, those guys that aren't necessarily always highly rated. You also bring in highly rated players, and you find a way to make it work and make it a family and make it a strong culture, not just talk. It's got to be authentic. It has to be real. It can't be talking about culture all the time, or talking about toughness, or talking about going to the NFL or this or that. It's got to be authentic and real and not fake, because people see through fake. People see through that rah-rah stuff, or the loud yelling and all that stuff when you don't have substance behind it. They need to have an authentic program builder, who can get Michigan State back to where it was during the D'Antonio era. And I think the fallacy of the Mel Tucker era was that, we have to recruit like Georgia. We need to be Georgia. We need to do this like Alabama. We need to win press conferences. Win perception type things. It's not that. You don't need to win social media. You need to win football games. You need to do it with toughness and hard work.
I think Michigan State tried to recruit out of a book and just only recruit 4 stars when Tucker first came here, and that was worth trying with his personnel. I don't think it is.
I mean, you and I have covered.
Well, we've seen it,
but we've covered recruiting for a long time, and we've seen. I'll go back to the programs that recruit off lists. We could say who they are. The programs who blanket offer. And I'll say Michigan State blanket offered it. They bring in a whole bunch of guys, and our recruiting writers would cover them, and you're like, oh, you're here from Michigan State, you're here from Michigan State, come in for an unofficial visit, get the hard sell, oh, you're not going to commit, move on to the next guy. I think you can recruit high-level players by building relationships, and the whole blanket offer and the throwing darts at dartboards. Sometimes you have to go out in the country to go look for players when you don't have them. We've seen that even in the past with the D'Antonio era. But just to kind of willy-nilly throw offers out there and not do boots on the ground evaluation and just kind of offer based on highlight film and recruiting off list. That doesn't work at Michigan State, and that shouldn't work at any program.
And Michigan State their assistant coaches did spend a lot of time on film trying to figure out which 4 stars they wanted and so forth. But the directive from Tucker and Saeed Khalif when they were here was, we want 4 stars of this size, and you're in charge of your position. Go get them.
Let me ask you this. Would a guy like Simeon Barrow, considering his size coming out of high school, your best defensive lineman, your most disruptive, would Simeon Barrow, and he was kind of a tweener coming out of high school in South Carolina, or was it South Carolina? He would not have been offered, in my opinion.
He was in the Augusta area, and there's somewhere.
Right. He would not, be in that 6'3", 255, 260 range coming out of high school. He wouldn't fit their size profile. Maverick Hansen, no way in heck. He probably maybe walk-on offer at best. So all that size type stuff. Look who's out there starting games, and do they match up with the size profile of what they're trying to bring in?
Yeah, I'm saying it was interesting for Michigan State to give it a try that way, because we've not seen that attempted, and it coincided with the transfer portal and NIL coming in, which shook up some things also. So I can see why Tucker came in and said, we need to have a roster that looks like what I'm accustomed to seeing. I know what a roster looks like size-wise, and that's fine. In the Brady bunch, the shirt fits. I'm dating myself with that. When Greg Brady got a record contract just because the shirt fit him. If Jarrett Jackson's a first is a given size coming off the bus, we want him. Well, he's been busted up, and he's trying to get back on the field or whatever. But long term, you're better off identifying a Simeon Barrow, whether he's local or somewhere else. And yes, you do want to go after some 4 stars. I'm not saying close the door on 4 stars, but do not turn your back on the 3 stars closer to home while you're looking at those things. Now, recruiting's different than it used to be. D'Antonio didn't recruit 4 stars in the Southeast a whole lot because he had to buy them back then. Now everybody's buying everybody, so that changes the game in some respects.
And
so
with the portal out there, and fewer high school players getting scholarships, there are more 3 and 4 star recruits available. But I go back and look at the fallacy of Mel Tucker's recruiting. You can talk a big game about recruiting, but when you really look at it, there's not. They signed some high players that were ranked highly, but did they sign anyone higher ranked than Will Golston, Lawrence Thomas, Edwin Baker? You go through the list of the guys that Monte Nicholson. You go through the list of the guys.
They spent a lot of time trying to get guys that were ranked high.
Right, and they spent a lot of money in some instances trying to get guys from NIL. So you look at their recruiting philosophy, and you look at they've got a couple top 25 recruiting classes. To me, that doesn't count if you have 0 interior defensive linemen, and you've got 8 defensive backs. That's a John L. Smith class, and that's if you don't have the players that fit your needs. That's the bottom line with recruiting. I don't care what it's ranked. If you don't recruit the players that fit your program needs, your class is a failure. I don't care if it's ranked 5 in the country. Everybody needs defensive tackles every single year. If you don't have high school defensive tackles and you let your program get to where it is right now, your recruiting philosophy is an abject failure, because you're putting yourself in a situation where you are completely dependent on the portal. So we can talk about Mel Tucker being a recruiter, and I hear a lot of fans and subscribers say we need to get a guy that can recruit like Mel Tucker. Mel Tucker and his staff, Saeed Khalif, did a terrible job in terms of evaluating players on the ground. It's off film. It's throwing stuff at a dartboard. Camp was not utilized at all, except as a money-making tool. And Michigan State did a horrible job with camp evaluations. And you
mean players that come to
players
camp?
that come to camp evaluations.
In terms of finding a Benny Fowler,
getting
finding
guys
a
on
Trey
camp,
Waynes.
Josiah Price.
People that the D'Antonio didn't even know, and his staff didn't know until they came to camp. It's like, who's that guy?
Right.
Josiah Price.
I'm just saying,
that's Benny Fowler. Who? Benny Fowler, future Super Bowl NFL guy. Who's that guy? Trey Waynes. He came to our camp. He's from Wisconsin. Future first-round draft
Michigan
pick.
State camps under Mark D'Antonio had
a resource.
They had better talent, better overall talent.
Because then word gets out. If you go to this camp, you can get an offer. If not for Michigan State, other MAC schools that are there.
I mean, we could count on there being
now, some of Michigan State's assistant coaches did put in a lot of work to make sure that they had players at the camp that they worked with and they recruited. But top to bottom, we can talk about it more some other day. But that's just one part of it. But that's what's been successful here in the past.
What I'm saying
that needs to be utilized, in my opinion.
What I'm saying is like the whole idea of Mel Tucker as a great recruiter at Michigan State, and that Michigan State was somehow better as a recruiting operation with far more resources. They had far more resources than Mark D'Antonio had in terms of the auxiliary personnel, the number of people they had working on recruiting. To think that they did a markedly better job than what D'Antonio did, I call BS on that, because they neglected key positions, and Michigan State's going to be paying for it moving forward.
The roster right now has some toughness to it, but you're right, the defensive tackles, they're older players, and behind them, there's question marks in terms of young players coming up. Linebacker, I know they've been recruiting for a 4-2-5 system. They had to play Iowa, and they went on the road. They had an injury to Windman, Jacoby Windman out for the year, injury to Ma'anate Ote from the spring. They went to Iowa with 5 scholarship linebackers to play a 4-3. They didn't have a full scholarship too deep at linebacker. And to their credit, Brulet's playing pretty hard. Halliday played pretty well early in the game, took on a fullback in an isolation, got rid of the fullback, made a play for a tackle at the line of scrimmage. Halliday did some good things in that game. Jordan Hall, great. That's an example of a great recruitment. They shot high, went after an excellent kid, and Hazelton did the recruiting on that a lot. And you haven't seen Hazelton show up in recruiting a whole lot. He did with Hall. They were in on him early. They saw it through. Hall is such an impressive player in person. He's so mature, and they're fortunate to have him right now. And they put in a lot of work to get him. He was a 4-star from a long way away. Got that one done, saw it through, came in. He's playing right away, doing some great things. That's one very good one.
But I'm just
that's kind of an exception.
What I'm saying is Mark D'Antonio had those kind of guys in his classes. Like the Lawrence Thomases, Will Golstons. Donnie Corley. They had those guys in their classes, and in the state of Michigan.
And they would have a 3 deep of scholarship linebackers that would redshirt. There was no portal back then, so it was easier to keep a guy in your program and not move out.
The reason I talk about the recruiting and stuff like that, the perception versus reality, when I talk about Michigan State needing to have an authentic head coach and an authentic program, that's what I'm talking about, because the perception of Mel Tucker as a recruiter didn't line up with the talent level coming into the program or the results on the field. So
I thought the energy was really good recruiting in the first 2 years, and it's kind of dissipated in some ways.
But even if you look at Mark D'Antonio, like when he put together after getting hired in November of 2006, that class that they put together in a short period of time, they had tremendous recruiting energy, and they 7 NFL guys in there. Even some of the walk-ons from like 2008, when you look at like Miles White or Mitchell White, I mean, in-state guys, eval guys. Michigan State, whomever takes over, needs to get back to in-person evaluation, relationship-based recruiting, and not throwing dartboards at a list of whoever went to this camp or that camp.
That's what happens when you are, and Harlan Barnett said this the week that he became the acting head coach, that he preferred more of the regional recruiting system. He remembers what it was like at D'Antonio. And I reached out to people that I know that cover Georgia and Alabama, and Georgia and Alabama do it regionally. With Tucker, the positional thing, I never got a chance to ask Tucker about it. I don't know where he got that idea, but it wasn't from Saban or Kirby Smart. And I give him credit for thinking outside the box and trying something different and going after a certain size and certain recruits that were, perceived as big time. But if it seems to me that if you are, the defensive backs coach previously, or the D-line coach, and you're responsible for your room, and the directive is we want 4 stars, you have to start with a list. And you're looking at film and making determinations, whereas like Harlan Barnett said on his radio show 3 weeks ago, in the old days, Barnett would be in charge of, the Gulf Coast of Florida, Cincinnati, and maybe I think one part in Michigan.
Flint area.
So year after year after year, he's going back to those same coaches.
Bay City,
and although he's a defensive backs coach, they might say, hey, man, we got this tight end you might want to look at. So he would pass it off to the tight ends coach, and that's how those things went. And it worked out pretty well. That's the way most programs do it. Michigan State tried it differently. They had some success in some ways. The roster right now, I think, was starting to look pretty good for this year. Whether or not it would maintain that with the questions of defensive tackle going forward would remain to be seen. And with what's going on with the football program, it's going to be we don't know who's staying and all those things. But they tried it. But even Barnett said that he prefers the other system. So
the way
I don't disparage a lot of what they did, because sometimes some things are worth trying and it's never been attempted before. And to see Michigan State go out there and try to recruit against the best was interesting. And Tucker coming off an 11-2 season with his ability theoretically to sell, with his with his personality. I thought that had a chance to maybe take Michigan State recruiting to a level that Tucker thought was possible. So it was worth, as an experiment, watching a Michigan State coach try to do that. Did he see it through with the relentlessness he was talking about previously? That's up for debate, maybe not.
No, I'll say it's a perception thing on that too, because you didn't build relationships with high school coaches. So you can say I'm putting all this energy into it and whatnot, but you look at Alabama and all those schools, recruiting is a relationships thing. And if you're just trying to get the top kids on your campus without actively recruiting their high school coaches.
I think they did in like Georgia, some places in Georgia, some of those schools down there.
They didn't do it in Texas. They didn't do it in California. They didn't do it in a lot of the other schools. There's a lot of guys that signed and their high school coaches never even talked to Michigan State coaches. So, I mean.
And you know that as a fact. You've talked to high school coaches
right,
that told you that.
They were very upset about it. And wanted what was best for their kids, and didn't want to MF Michigan State, but at the same time were like upset because these kids are like their children. And if you're not going all in and spending time in that school, talking to high school coaches, developing relationships, it makes sense to recruit off lists because you're not going to go back there again. The way that I respect people that recruit, and most people do recruit, is you're in the same schools, you develop the relationships. High school coaches know the kind of players that you want, know the kind of players you need for your program, and they'll put you on guys. And we've seen that over the years. Like when D'Antoni was here, lots of times, well, we've got a player for you. He'd be perfect in your 4-3, that type of thing. And Michigan
you got to check out this guy Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah, Michigan State was not in that situation, and it doesn't work that way here.
Meanwhile, who's leading the Big Ten in rushing? Anyway, so Michigan State football, a lot going on, a lot of different balls in a lot of different areas. And Michigan State, as they look for a head coach, those type of things will come up when it's interview time for coaches and so forth. Go ahead.
The positive thing is to have time to vet guys. Like when you talk about the search firm being given a list of candidates or whatever by the athletic director and whomever's involved in the search, that's a lot better alternative than depending solely on those guys for names. And Michigan State, the timing of the whole coaching change, they have no excuses in terms of vetting, with as much time as they've had. You can't say, well, I had to make this choice because of this. They should be thorough in the whole process, and they should know everything there is to know about a head coach if they're doing their job right.
All right, still a lot to talk about in terms of coaching candidates, and it's a finite list of candidates, of potential candidates. Everybody, I've been saying it for 3 weeks. Everybody thinks that there's like this limitless, array of coaches out there, like the number of stars in the sky, that you can just pick one and there's going to be, some Nick Saban that drops down. It's a finite number. Just pick up the top 25. Tell me which coaches you think are available realistically. Right. It's not like you're going to pull an LSU or a USC and pull Lincoln Riley from across the country. That's not realistic. But you're not a bottom 34 Power 5 team that has to take a coordinator from another school or a position coach from the NFL. Michigan State's in that category where you can pull a proven head coach from a Power 5 school. And it just so happens timing-wise. I'm not saying these two are the leading candidates, but from timing perspective, we know what's happened in the Pac-12. We know that Oregon State and Washington State were left out, and they happen to have two excellent they're in the process of having two excellent seasons right now. That's good news for Michigan State. I'm not saying those are two guys that'll end up being top candidates, but they are in the realistic pool for you. Right. So Michigan State is fortunate that way. And there's others in the group of five. I'm not sure they match up. For instance, I use the Sonny Dykes example. Pretty good coach in Texas, went out to Cal Berkeley, was not a good fit, didn't work. Goes back to TCU, he's had success, okay? It was SMU before that, then TCU. He's a Texan, it made sense. There's a group of five coaches that are out there that are pretty good, but Paul, maybe they're very Southern, with nothing against them, but they may not want to come here, and it just might not play well. Nothing against them. That being said, there's always exceptions. You go back to the 1970s, and Iowa pulled a guy from North Texas State, which wouldn't have seemed to have been a fit, but Hayden Fry became an institution, so it can work that way too. There's no absolutes in this, Paul. Anyone that says, this guy would be the great hire, or this guy would be a terrible hire, I've seen it go both ways, and every hand's a winner and every hand's a loser.
Right. The one thing, going back to like Washington State, Oregon State, is this is the year that you can't fake it in the Pac-12. It's a really good talent year. Even like, you look at a team like UCLA a couple of years ago when Chip Kelly took over, they were not very good on offense. This year they're really good on defense, and they've got an offense that's coming along nicely. I happened to watch a Washington State game, and I know a lot of you guys did as well. Disappointment for Washington State in losing that game 25-17. The thing that impressed the heck out of me is that the defense kept on coming the entire game, regardless of circumstance. Even though the quarterback threw 3 interceptions, they had another fumble. To hold that UCLA team to 25 points, to bow up like that in the red zone, and to play with the kind of self-conviction that I saw on defense there, to me that was kind of my question with Washington State. Is, I know the numbers that they're putting up. I know like what they were putting up on offense, and how are they going to do when they need to play defense? And I saw a really good defense there, and them doing a lot with maybe personnel that other schools wouldn't have success with.
And their schedule lines up. They could put together a succession of wins. They go to Arizona this weekend, I think. Then they have Oregon after that. Washington State does.
If you can win at Washington State and you can win at Oregon State,
yeah,
that bodes well for you. I feel like the picture that you get from an 8 or 9 win Pac-12 team this year, depending on who some of those wins are, I think you get a better idea for what that coach might bring to the table than maybe an 8 or 9 win ACC coach, in my opinion.
All right, it's going to be worth watching. Michigan State and their people are going to be watching those teams. I've not detected that Michigan State's in on Charles Huff yet at Marshall yet, but he's impressive, and they almost beat North Carolina State. If he goes 11-1, does he get in line for another job somewhere else? He's impressive in a lot of ways too. Michigan State has some candidates out there. Elko's impressive. We'll have to wait and see what becomes of that. I think Duke is committed to trying to keep him, and I'm not sure he's looking around right now for maybe this type of job. And your point's well taken about Michigan State and the circus that's perceived some ways, especially in-state. The circus, not so much about the board, it's just the fact that there's no president in place, which might cause him to pause. Other coaches wouldn't mind. They're going to come in and they would like to take a job like Michigan State. All right, we've been going way too long, but a lot of stuff going on with Michigan State football as they try to get a big win at Rutgers, get to 3-3, maybe try to, if I'm a Michigan State fan looking at it, best case scenario, you get to 6-6, you hire a coach Monday after Thanksgiving, and you give Michigan State's players bowl practice. Some guys might want to opt out. That's fine. You have another coach named to come in, 6-6, bowl practices. Next guy's hired. He observes bowl practice, and you get an extra game, extra practices. To me, if I'm a fan, that's what I'm rooting for this season to become a bridge. And Harlan Barnett's doing his best to move the program forward. Not himself. He's working to move the program forward, and he's doing an excellent job. All that can be asked of him.
I think it's impressive what he's done under difficult circumstances, not wins and losses wise, but as a human being, as someone who's a steward of the program. And I think Mark D'Antonio, talked to Harlan Barnett about that in the bye week of, hey, this was not your fault. This is not a situation that you brought on in any way. You've been cast into a really difficult situation, and you're doing your best to make it work. And you need to understand that you're doing everything right under the circumstances.
And he's got a great heart and he's a great communicator. Yeah. And if anyone can get these guys to keep hitting and blocking and tackling, he's the guy right now to make that happen. We'll see if they can keep it together. Tough task, and they need to win. And they're going for it. So we'll see what happens Saturday at Rutgers. Anything else, Paul? Sorry we went so long, but there's a lot going on with Michigan State football in a lot of different areas. And we appreciate you guys checking us out. Hey, give us a like here, subscribe to the channel, go to SpartanMag.com, become a subscriber. I should have said that earlier. Thanks for hanging with us this long. We appreciate you. We appreciate you checking out SpartanMag.com. For Paul Konyndyk, my name is Jim Comparoni. You've been watching the VCast from East Lansing with the Spartans, SpartanMag.com.